this is part four and the last part of the interview with Neil. I love this interview. It's been really really insightful for me. To hear Neil's story about his transformation from undercover police officer through to kind of drug policy reform activist. So yeah, really really great. Thanks for all the support. I know you're going to enjoy this last part.
MP. So is it something that you would sort of, as part of your activities, is it local kind of politicians, like local MP lobbying? Is it, I mean, do you have an approach to that? Is it something that, take an area like, I mean, if this is very small C Conservative where I live, so these are the sort of, to change the sort of cultural narrative, if you like, these are the sort of places, I guess, which are going to be potentially the hardest to reach. Do you have a different approach for sort of different types of areas? I mean, I guess in someone like Leith, for example, it might be like pushing at an open door.
It's important to note that, drug policy reform is a non-partisan issue. And so, yeah, you do have different conversations depending on whereabouts you are on the political spectrum, but don't assume that the left is easier, because, there's in many Labour strongholds around the UK, the Labour tradition is very autocratic from the sort of foundational trade union movement origins. There is an autocratic streak going on there in some traditional Labour heartlands, and they're no more, some communities that has its origin, that has an historical left leaning, are just as hard as some of the communities that you're talking about in terms of small c or large c conservative. So you've got to see the advantages where they are. And, to a conservative audience, I mean, I spoke at the Labour conference last year. I also spoke at the Conservative conference, and similar crowd for the event. And, that the Conservative one was more interesting in some ways because of how transformative the event was. The Labour event was perhaps more populated by people who were already strongly sympathetic to reform. The Conservative was really split between people who were already sympathetic and people that were intellectually interested but resistant.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a bigger shift in the room in the Conservative event, because where people are engaged in politics, often you find them interested and open to intellectual debate. So it's about knowing, it's about having the platform, is essentially it. It's mm-hmm. finding the in. If you've got mm-hmm. a councillor, local councillor, I mean, for example, the Andrew Boff councillor in London, he's a great ally. He's a brilliant, I don't know if you've ever heard Andrew Boff speak on drug policy. Very conservative, to the right of the party, I would say. Mm-hmm. But he's one of the best people I've ever heard speak on drug policy. He's brilliant. And I just wish he had been the Conservative candidate instead of the one that we've got, Bailey, because he was the one against him. How good would that have been? So there are good figures in each party, and there are ways of persuading them. I mean, in the Conservative Party or conservative leaning philosophy, you could say, there is a great tradition of pragmatism, for example, and you can appeal to that pragmatic streak within the Conservative viewpoint. In some ways, you could argue that the Conservative Party has a better record than Labour on drug policy, because Norman Fowler, now the Lord Norman Fowler of the leader of the House of Lords, mm-hmm. He's the person who advocated harm reduction in the 1980s that allowed it to happen. He advocated needle exchanges to cope with the AIDS epidemic. He was the one that persuaded Margaret Thatcher to accept it and to advocate it. And, across Europe, that was pretty left field. Across the world, that was really left field, very forward thinking. But that was a pragmatic approach to a specific health problem. So, pragmatism is a way that you can appeal to conservative minds. But also, there's a strong tradition, certainly in certain parts of the Conservative Party, in belief in liberty. I'm not just going for the more libertarian extreme views. I mean, personal liberty. And that is something that we can appeal to. Now, that's slightly missing at the moment from a very socially conservative Home Secretary, and on the face of it, there's a very socially conservative front to the Conservative Party, but there's also traditionally, Boris Johnson is socially liberal, and he has on his team an advisor, Blair Gibbs, whose former job was cannabis activist, essentially. So you've got all these things in place, but then of course in Labour, it's really interesting, and even I could even say exciting, because the front bench is almost the dream pick for a drug policy in the next few years. Ed Miliband as business secretary, he's spoken very well on cannabis regulation. Jonathan Ashworth was kept as health secretary by Keir Starmer after the Labour conference last year. He's the first health spokesman from any party to state, since the Misuse of Drugs Act or before, to state that drugs should be in his department, not the home department. And that was a major political movement last year. That's an important step. And Keir Starmer kept him in post. So there's all of these sort of hints. Now, you've probably gathered that I'm unreasonably optimistic. But as an activist, you have to see where the next opportunity could come from, and you have to be optimistic, because that's how we win. That's how we fight and keep fighting. We have to look for those opportunities.
Yeah. So that's the end of the interview with Neil Woods from Leap UK. Please have a look at the work that they're doing in the sort of drug policy reform area. Please like, subscribe, follow, do what we need to do on social media to really get this information out there. Thanks for watching. Take care.